It will be hard for him to find me.
I need to write better algorithms to find these guys.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I got you.
Can you see me? I'm jumping and waving my hands. That's really cool. Really good.
The camera did great, but the first one kind of broke down. Took a lot more data than I could analyze myself, but I found Minghao in the end.
David Brady's high-resolution camera is a great technological achievement, advancing the resolution of cameras dramatically and far beyond what we've experienced in digital photography. The company he founded, Equati, has given the name to its product that mashes camera and computer. They call their products computers, mainly because the devices are a mixture of image capture and computational analysis. The application of his company's work, however, is within a society and a political framework that uses surveillance pervasively. Asked if he had qualms about such uses of his computers, he said, "A government doesn't need the hand of technology to be oppressive." He's right, of course. Uses of technologies don't always run back to their creators, though whether they should bear some responsibility has been a matter of debate. This theme explores surveillance. We watch over property and loved ones to keep them protected and safe. We have many good reasons to surveil, but surveillance technologies are applied in ways that sometimes give us pause, or sometimes even outrageous, even when they're applied illegally and for some reason that appears justified. Technology has also enabled new products that we often find essential, that are built upon their ability to watch us, to profile us, and to understand us. It's been said that Google knows us better than we ourselves do. And that's because the technology that Google and others use carefully watch us. And the trade we make for giving over our information is for the sake of those very useful products and for an online connection, perhaps, with digital friends. We rarely think about the terms of the exchange or ask whether or not those terms are actually worth it. This section looks at surveillance from different perspectives and from different circumstances. The views emerge from conversations with a computer scientist, an internet systems administrator, a teacher, designer, and artist. Vince Konitzer, the computer scientist, presents issues in facial recognition and surveillance quite generally, and he discusses frameworks that are used to evaluate surveillance activities. He poses questions that relate quite broadly to facial recognition and surveillance. Jeremy Hopkins, the IT guy, has studied employee monitoring. He helps run email and many of the other internet-based services that we use at Duke every day, and that also happen to be the place where monitoring can be done. Though Jeremy notes that Duke does not peer into emails, as many companies do. Where do you draw the line between privacy and monitoring when it comes to the workplace? What is it like to be a member of the staff responsible for executing decisions like that? Employee monitoring isn't just for detecting intellectual property theft, for example, or identifying excessive goofing off or dalliance with Facebook, or illegal behavior on the net like distributing child pornography. Monitoring has moved into other areas of business life, collecting employee activities and interactions in order to inform, say, organizational designs or to nudge employee behaviors. sometimes even out of the office. A product called Vimo, for example, calls itself a sales assistant and logs all sales activities automatically, including calls and meetings and emails. It analyzes sales that are completed and automatically coaches with nudges to improve productivity and grow revenues across various types of businesses, the website says. These ends are accomplished by using data captured in surveillance and monitoring, and they work on your mobile phone in your daily life. Another product called Chorus does much the same thing by analyzing calls and other interactions like Zoom calls and integrating data from other sources. Chorus provides coaching for telephone interactions too. You're talking too fast. You use too many filler words. These are legitimate business reasons for monitoring, but they've also been called creepy. Vimo, for example, will use machine learning to give you the next nearest prospect recommendations, even as you drive through a certain part of town. Jocelyn McDonald, faculty lead at Science and Society's Ethics and Technology program, is also an artist and designer. She's explored strategies to mask one's face from facial recognition analysis, not so much as a scalable tactic to claw back some privacy, but rather as a form of resistance, and in order to draw attention to the pervasiveness and the implications of facial recognition and overweening surveillance. These often artistic evasions of facial recognition applications are not scalable, Jocelyn is quick to point out, but that's not exactly the purpose of the resistance. Our class guest is Mark McCahill, who has designed and programmed services that use computer vision, including a facial recognition program that can unlock doors. These four people will help us begin to tease out some of the questions that relate to facial recognition technologies and surveillance. They won't provide answers, but they will provide us different perspectives that we need to take into account as we begin to grapple with this very complex relationship that we have with a certain kind of technology. There are some paradoxes in surveillance that arise from the scalability and the interconnectedness of surveillance technologies. Amazon's Ring, for example, is widely used by individual households to watch over front porches and to guard deliveries of packages, for example. The Ring meets individual needs very well, but the Ring can be networked too. And the technology forms the basis of a surveillance system with ties to police and public safety departments in the Neighbors by Ring program. There are many affiliates. It may be a bit ironic that by individuals installing a Ring device at their own front doors, they're capturing a great view of the neighbors across the street, in addition to those who step on the porch. In a very real way, individuals have, perhaps unwittingly, installed a pervasive social surveillance network with their own individual money and their own independent choices. Duke has its cameras too, as do many colleges and universities. Facial recognition technologies have become an issue that members of the university community have begun to pay attention to. The Stop Facial Recognition on Campus campaign has surveyed colleges and universities to find out whether they use facial recognition for campus surveillance in what they call a scorecard. Many colleges are using it. Others have decided not to, and still others haven't closed the door to using it in the future. The campaign invites people to join the open letter, part of which reads, "We demand that college administrators work together with our coalition to keep facial recognition off of campuses, except for personal use, like unlocking a phone, or for ethically conducted research." Groups like these worry that freedoms on campus will be surveilled to death.
My interest in surveillance started when I was getting my MFA at Parsons in design and technology, and I took a class with David Carroll, who wound up being one of the major contributors to the understanding of Cambridge Analytica's relationship to Facebook. So he was actually he brought that case by doing a Freedom of Information Act request on his information that was held in a UK server. So under GDPR regulations, he was able to request the information that Cambridge Analytica had stored on a UK server. Cambridge Analytica is based in both the United States and the UK. So that sort of like cracked open the understanding of what Facebook had been collecting and selling. Well, no, what Facebook had been collecting and what Cambridge Analytica had been able to sweep. So I had this class with Dave, and in it, I realized that there'd been a shift that I didn't quite understand from my orientation, and I think most people's orientation of thinking about surveillance. Like when you hear those terms, you know, like what comes to your mind? That'd be a good question for your students. Like what right now is the image that's in your mind? Because when I started that class, the image that came to my mind when you had mentioned surveillance or surveillance technologies were like CCT cameras, Big Brother. Those globe cameras were like the latest innovation, and seeing them on the street and saying, you know, I lived in New York at the time, like, wow, we don't want skateboarders in front of the Ace Hotel, so we're going to put in these globe cameras and like document people, or what the police were using. Or maybe I was thinking about X-Files and like getting your phone bugged by often a policing entity or maybe a private company in terms of privacy protection and property protection, the latter. So when in that class, we realized, you know, over the course of time, yes, the government is surveilling you, and Snowden's revelations, which, you know, should be taken a little bit with a grain of salt because that's one person's experience and sort of mapping out what was happening around them in sort of a contract position working for a larger group within the NSA. But the revelations around PRISM, data collection, and how complicit in that data collection scheme private social media companies or, you know, email providers like Google were in contributing to this huge sphere of data collection. So it was less in my mind over the course of time, the sort of stereotypical understandings of surveillance. It shifted to me understanding that it's yes, it is those sort of policing agencies, you know, getting a warrant or not in terms of PRISM, just doing data sweeps. But it's also these tech companies that I liked, you know, and I still like to use a lot of their services, but you come to understand that what they're presenting themselves as to you as a consumer is different to how they're presenting themselves to the government in terms of a partner in a surveillance scheme. And so then that just flipped a switch in me from that point on to being much more critical in my thinking of social media companies and what I'm giving. And I don't know if you've heard that expression. If you're not paying for a service, you are the service. And so there's that understanding, like, you're not paying to use Facebook, you're what they're selling. Like, they're selling that information about you to data brokers who are using that to market to you or to sell to other personal consumers that want. How do you talk about that in a way that doesn't immediately make people shut down? Because I became so interested in it that I talked about it all the time. And I just watched people shut down because it's scary. It's super scary. And if you want to be on Instagram, because that's how you connect with your friends from college and you share beautiful moments in your life, like getting married, you don't really want to associate that same thing that brings you a lot of pleasure with sort of the dark sides of it. Perhaps about 2 years ago, there's a huge uptick, like a market uptick in these really adventurous makeup looks, which I should just send you like this portfolio I have of them that I captured. And there's just a trend on TikTok, on Instagram. I see them all over the place where makeup artists are doing these incredible looks, like optical illusion looks, or they're attaching like paper mache butterflies all over part of their face. It's just this gorgeous practice. It's very artistic. It takes an immense amount of effort. And I was so fascinated by it and intrigued by it. And it just clicked in my mind one day, like, I've been thinking about facial recognition. I've been thinking about biometric surveillance. So that's using personal parts of your appearance or your body to identify you. And that stuff's really scary because facial recognition is one that most people know about, facial detection and facial recognition, but there's like ear detection. There's a huge push in the biometric surveillance community for that. Gait detection, so how you walk, your cadence, the way your hips move, the length of between your legs, your steps. So there's all sorts of like biometric surveillance that's taking off right now. But facial recognition is the one a lot of people are talking about. I think it's the scariest since it's being adopted by so many policing agencies. And we know that a lot of facial recognition algorithms are biased towards being able to accurately identify white faces and much poorer at identifying Black and brown faces and women's faces. So, but they're being used primarily on Black and brown faces. So they're inherently problematic and being widely adopted across the United States and elsewhere, I'm sure. So I was thinking about facial recognition and I was seeing all these really beautiful makeup looks and it just clicked, you know, a couple of years ago. I was like, you know, what if we could use these makeup looks that people are doing and churning out just as like a demonstration of their expert practice and use that as a framework to teach people how facial recognition works and introduce to people a larger understanding of surveillance technologies as part of maybe a workshop experience, and then give people an understanding of what it is, have a community or a group of people learning together, and then have people spend time trying to do their own looks and make their own looks.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
go ahead, yeah.
I remember the first time that I encountered your work with sort of the floral themes, and I thought, well, you know, that's very impractical. Who's going to wear that? But I think I was actually missing the point at that first thing. That this isn't actually a way that you would present yourself normally, but it is a way that that calls attention to issues that it is responding to. So, you know, in a sense, the art is less about self-expression and more about an exploration of a phenomenon of surveillance. So
Yeah.
that I think is important to push over the line in a sense. The people who encounter the look need to see it as not so much a look for them as a look that points to something else.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head. There has been some press about this work, and the thing that irks me whenever people write about it without reading about it or talking to me about it is that it seems like they really focus in on, is this scalable? Like, is this a scalable solution? Look at me, I started this. I'm not wearing flowers all over my face right now, but I could walk outside or walk by a police station or walk by any number of CCTV cameras that could be networked to a facial recognition algorithm and be identified. And it's something I'm very aware of, but I'm not wearing the look right now because what we really need are legal and policy-based solutions that protect people. And part of the way that you get there is that obviously you have representatives who are clued in to why this is important, but our elected representatives are doing what the people are asking them to in an accurately working system, an appropriately working system. And part of the way that we get there, we get representatives to care about it and to, you know, there's limited time. What are they going to focus on? Which issues? Is that you educate and inform a populace so that they become extremely passionate, and that it's not just you, like a tech ethicist or a tech designer, writing letters over and over again. It's a body or a corpus of people that are saying, this is strange, this is weird, there hasn't been a public conversation about this, my opinions and that of my community members haven't been taken into consideration before. Many police stations, and I'm trying to think of ways to capture people's attention, and these floral looks and these makeup looks that people that come to my workshops make, they seem to catch people's eyes and they make people pay attention for a little bit of time. And at least in the workshops that I've hosted, it's been a really rewarding way to talk to people about their civil liberties and their relationship to their privacy. And then that can be stressful. This information can be stressful, especially how pervasive it already is, seems to be quite stressful to people. But there seems to be something nourishing and empowering about making people learning how to make their own looks that undermine facial recognition. And it also really practically teaches them about how facial recognition works, because I think part of people's issue with learning about algorithmic based surveillance is that it's a little tricky to understand, and a lot of the language is inaccessible. It's inaccessible to me sometimes when I'm learning about deep learning, new neural networks, and trying to understand a private company's approach, of which they don't publicly communicate how their system works or how their algorithm was built.
And I'm actually astounded by the whole ring phenomenon.
Oh my gosh.
You know, it isn't so much the government anymore, or you know the public health that's driving the installation of cameras. It's, you know, the individual who wants to be able to look out the front door remotely, not really knowing that they're part of a much larger network of interlinked cameras. That really, what they're doing is sort of a privately installed national surveillance network.
Yes, and police are in contractual agreement with Ring to tap into those networks. And to me, the morally reprehensible part is that on some level, okay, you want to monitor your own house for safety purposes, and let's exclude the part where the police can just tap into your Ring camera through an Amazon backdoor. The Ring cameras are facing away from your house towards your neighbor across the street's house, of which they have no ability to have any recourse in terms of whether they want to be surveilled or not. So I think it needs to be part of a larger conversation. And to me, I find it unethical to surveil your across the street neighbor or the Amazon delivery person. Like, I understand wanting to have personal protection, but I see a lot on social media, people being like, look at this hilarious video of my Amazon driver tripping as they fall out of their Amazon car, or getting bit by the neighbor's dog, and they didn't consent to be recorded, especially not in an embarrassing moment or a moment of desperation, or some of these videos that I see that trend on TikTok that are like cringy. But yeah, it's I think this kind of stuff needs to be part of a national conversation. And
One of the questions for the class is, you know, there is such a thing as surveillance that is justified, that is understood as an acceptable part of society. And then there's this other stuff that seems to be at the edges. How do you go about defining what justifiable surveillance is? Both as a person who is surveilled and someone who is wanting to keep an eye on their property or whatever.
Yeah, I had this debate with myself a couple weeks ago. Which is not where this would be a very good debate for the class to have with one another, and be really curious to see what your students have to say. To me, biometric surveillance or facial recognition, which is what I was paying attention to when I was thinking about this, under a court order, when there are exceptional circumstances, for instance, like a kidnapping, or perhaps someone that they've identified as being a murderer, and that the use of this surveillance technique, facial recognition is what I've been thinking about the most, the use of that technique is just one part of a body or corpus of evidence against a particular person. In that circumstance, I think at least it's worth a conversation about it being at that sort of level of exceptional circumstance. The issue that I'd love for your class to think about is that we know in the larger field of human-computer interaction something called automation bias. So we know that when an algorithm makes a decision, a piece of software that uses machine learning, people are incredibly biased to believe that that information is accurate over a human's determination around that same bit of information. So that's the issue. Like with Robert Williams being arrested in January, falsely because of the bad facial recognition match. The police ran an image of a person that robbed a Shinola watch store through their facial recognition system at the police department. It provided Robert Williams, who was nowhere near that Shinola store on that day. It provided a match with him. It wasn't accurate. It was poor. Police arrested this man, sat in front of this man, and looked at the algorithmic match and believed it, even though clearly in front of their face was a different man than the image that they had. And once the guy was like really protesting and calling his lawyer in and saying, this isn't me, and I was at work and there's lots of evidence that I wasn't there, they like shook from this dream of what an algorithm told them to be true. And it created such immense bias they couldn't even see what was in front of their face. So it's tricky, this conversation, like when is it appropriate? Well, you know, it should be appropriate in extenuating circumstances. It should be appropriate for the police to use it if they were willing to look and do the commensurate work, related work, to see it as part of an evidence pile.
Yeah, we're going to be reading a few articles. One of them is Margaret Hu's law review article that appeared in the Pepperdine Law Review about big data versus big data surveillance versus little data surveillance. And she talks about big data surveillance building like an avatar. An avatar that is compiled by really detailed digital descriptions and traces that people leave. And that the real danger is that the digital avatar and the real person become sort of conflated and overlapping, so that that one represents the other, especially that the data produced one represents the real one in ways that cast the real person into some sort of compromised situation, like the one that you described. And then there are some resolutions that maybe will evolve, but I think they evolve from awareness. Neil Postman, who you're familiar with, I'm sure, talked about the way that we understand media bias, and the way that we understand the ways that media manipulate our human consciousness is simply to understand that it does, and to understand the structure of media, and maybe that the tools of surveillance, like facial recognition technologies and these kind of amalgams of data that produce these digital avatars of us, that maybe if we plumb the depths into how they actually function, that we might be able to remove them from this sort of privileged place.
That's really fascinating. I mean, what you just brought up is something that I have encountered in these workshops that I've put on, where sometimes people push back. They're interested in the subject, but they say, well, I don't really mind that when I go shopping and I use my MVP card, that all of that data about what I'm buying gets stored somewhere that a data broker can purchase and then understand things about me. And that's that little data that you're referring to, like these little sort of quotidian daily acts, like what we like. You know, Facebook knows what you're hovering over in an article. Maybe you don't like it, but it raised your awareness, or you circle your mouse around something, or you highlighted text in an article that you're reading sort of in the leading description. So all this information, tiny, tiny, tiny things, what you hover on, what you think about, what you liked and then unliked, what you hit interested in an event, you know, what you clicked through, articles, all this stuff gets collected about you. And maybe that on its surface, or like on its head, doesn't seem that big of a deal. But then when you add the power of algorithms to it, it becomes like a wholly different thing.
Yeah, the privacy issue is one that dogs me in this, because and I think part of it might be that we are living in this environment where all of a sudden we're cooped up in our own little isolated cells, you know, and the only way that we actually are interacting is like this, you know, through this mediated digital tool. But do you see a shift in the way that we set up our expectations of privacy? How would you spell that out? And maybe you can just sort of look at it 5 years ago versus today. Um, and where are the shifts, and what does that mean for you personally, and what do you think that might mean societally?
I do feel like over the last few years, there's been an immense shift towards decreasing personal privacy and sharing a lot as a social currency using digital tools and social media. So it seems like, social media has sort of tapped into one of our deepest psychological orientations, which is to be part of a community, to be valued contributor to a community, to be well liked, well received, well respected, contributing member to a community. And they've tapped into that. And now your community is thousands of people on Instagram, or everyone you've ever known on Facebook, or now it's TikTok and making these quirky videos inside your home, in a minute or less. And so there's a real social currency that seems, as sort of surface level as it might seem, it is motivating millions of users on a daily basis to share information about their personal lives, to share what to me would be unfathomable 10 years ago, which is naked pictures of children in digital spaces, is now people don't bat an eyelash. Like, I will just scroll by when I see a friend of mine that's just had a baby sharing these kinds of images. So I think the real push and pull here, and that's been interesting and frankly slightly disheartening for me to watch, is that social media, our presence in digital spaces, is seemingly replacing some of our relationship with our physical places and our physical communities. And it's so alluring and seemingly rewarding for people that I think that our relationship, or our value that we place on privacy, is decreasing in lieu of having likes and people sharing information about you in digital spaces.
Yeah, one of the things that always has kind of amused me, well, used to amuse me, now it kind of alarms me, when I would be on campus, are just the legions of people, scrutinizing their palm as they walk across the quad. And you realize that, you know, um, through this digital device, we have redefined our society and who we interact with. 10 years ago, before these things became prevalent, we would be interacting with our immediate surroundings. We would see somebody across the quad and run and talk with them. But these have changed the equation of physical space even. So that now sometimes we even feel more connected to someone who is not physically present. And that that is actually kind of alarming to me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know where that will actually lead. Maybe there will be this sort of move back to localities as opposed to these digital constructs of new digital geographies that we've
Mm-hmm.
created for ourselves.
Yeah, I think about it a lot as like digital snacking. You're like, it's not a substantive meal to have a text exchange with an old friend or family member. It feels good. It's like having a lit chip or a pretzel. It's like, yeah, that's good, but it's not as satiating. And so I'm curious, like, will it just be that it's a snack oriented society and these deeper connections will be foregone, or will there be, and I guess I'm hoping slightly that there'll be a snap back effect where people will say, okay, this is cool. It was like a new toy that we got and we were super fascinated by it, but we've realized that it's actually just a very surface sort of way of interacting, and the human psyche and the human condition is one that demands much more substantive connection to community and much more substantive relationships with others that, to a degree, computer mediated exchanges can't quite meet our needs. I guess it's